why and how did you start the trombone?
Well, first of all, it wasn't the trombone that I started on. I started on the euphonium. In fact, we didn't have that fancy word then. They called it a baritone. Which, I grew up on a farm, and my father died the year I was born.
Oh.
So my mother was left with 5 of us under the age of 6 or 7, something. And I was born in 24, so that means that by the time I was school age, we were hitting the Depression, and things were not so good. And we started working very early as children, working in fields, doing all sorts of tasks around neighboring farms as well as our own. And so, like the miners in Pennsylvania, they say the football players come out of the mines because I wanted out of that environment. Yeah. And I sort of was curious about music at about 12. I wanted to see the new music teacher at my junior high school and said I wanted to play in a band, and I said I wanted to play clarinet, and he got one out, and I said, no, that's not it. I meant a cornet. And he said, well, I got too many cornets. And he said, here, play this. But it was a baritone, and I played it for, 3 or 4 years, and I got pretty good at it. And then he got concerned because he knew I was interested in music. He said, if you really want to get into music, you really ought to take up the trombone because there's not a lot of future for baritone outside the military. And so I got a trombone from a relative who had run a music store, paid $15 for it, was Pan American, and hated it. I just hated it. I thought, how would anybody want to play this instrument? And I used to listen to the trombone players in the band, and I thought, because the baritone is such a flowing and easy instrument. My lovely things to play in the trombone, zoompa. But I did take it seriously, and I got the trombone. And by the time World War II rolled around, and the getting into the Army and finding a slot was, I benefited by the fact that I doubled by that time. I would play both instruments, and so during the war, by this time I was already 21, no, 18 or 19, and really got serious about the trombone, and I was primarily interested in jazz, and I was not very good at it, and I had idols like Bill Harris was a favorite at the time, and so I went through the war years doing all sorts of playing euphonium, playing trombone, and so on. So post-World War II, I got into I was auditioning at Eastman and Juilliard. I got into Juilliard. I didn't get into Eastman, and so and during that summer, before going to Juilliard, I was taking lessons with a guy in New York by the name of Simon Karasik. He was an old Remington student, and I told him I wanted to play euphonium for him one day. And he said, do you play euphonium? And I said, yes. He said, God, forget it. He says, you get known as no, he said, how good are you? I said, well, I play it better than I do the trombone. He said, put it away, because if you get known as a good euphonium player in this town, it's death, which is sort of funny in retrospect, because practically everything that I did in my professional career was affected positively by the fact that I was a euphonium player.
Very interesting.
Reiner was interested because he heard a recording that I did with the Boston Symphony of Don Quixote. I got into the New York City Ballet because they had a lot of baritone there, and I was known, Harvey Phillips was a good friend, and so they needed a baritone player. And it goes on. I got my first Broadway show because it was a double, baritone and trombone. So, as I say, so my original advice to give it up or put it in a closet was not, it didn't turn out to be the case. Gunther Schuller was a big factor in my playing because he needed a euphonium for a recording of a brass symphony. Do you ever know that brass symphony?
Yes.
Gunther Schuller? Yes. Well, he'd lost his regular euphonium player, and that was the beginning of another era. Okay.
Yeah, sure.
I'm going on.
So, yeah, so...
that sort of, it was rather typical in a way. I mean, I wanted to get off the farm, and the music looked like the right way to go, and it was all instinctual. I didn't really know enough to know what I was doing.
And where was the farm?
Oneida, New York, right near Syracuse,
Neat.
central New York.
And what did you guys raise?
What did we raise?
What did you raise? Yeah.
It was a dairy farm. That
Oh.
whole area of New York State at that time was called a dairy shed. It's almost obsolete now. But
Yeah.
typical dairy farm,
Yeah.
cows and horses. And as I say, after my father died, my mother ran it until 29 with hired help, but by then when the crash came, they couldn't manage it. So actually our farm became inoperative through those years.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So then, your first job, your first professional playing job, what was that?
I could quickly say the Utah Symphony, but as a matter of fact, it was a ballroom on Broadway. The first summer in New York, I'd gotten into what we called in those days rehearsal bands. Bands used to gather at NOLA Studios, it's on 53rd and 54th on Broadway, and I'd hang out at NOLA Studios and sit in with bands whenever they needed trombone players. And I fell into one through a friend, and they got a job. So after having gotten into Juilliard, and
Who was your teacher there?
Davis Schumann.
Okay.
You know that name?
The famous Davis
Yeah.
Schumann with the trombone slide that actually follows the way the arm works.
An eccentric sort of guy. You know, he had a very strong, positive effect on me because until that time, when I must have been 22 then, I didn't really feel that I could do it. And somehow Schumann had that way in getting inside your head and convincing you that you could do it. And it became very clear to me that you either needed to feel you could do it or you needed to behave as you could do it. And so during that, right after having, I was there a year, in the fall, or somewhere along there, I played for Marisa Bravanel, who was at Utah for so many years. And I went to Utah in 48, 49. That was my first job.
Wow.
And I stayed 2 years, and they had that orchestra, one of the first orchestras that had a subsidy, and then they changed administrations and withdrew the subsidy, so they got into real economic problems. And I came back to New York, and for the next 5 to 10 years, I was jobbing all over the place. I toured the country about 7 times, I think, with Ballet Russe, Sadler's Wells Ballet, Arthur Fiedler, a bunch of so I did that kind of work from the time I was 22, 23 until 30, I would say.
So Ballet Russe, what kind of
Ballet
repertoire?
Russe de Monte Carlo.
Oh.
That was an offshoot of the Aguilas ballet, and it was
Amazing.
brought to this country. And existed for quite a long time.
Neat. So you know the ballet repertoire. Huh?
I did a lot of ballet. From the next ballet gig I had was Sadler's Wells Ballet, which became the Royal Ballet. And ultimately I married a girl from the Royal Ballet. You know Wendy.
Wendy, yeah.
And I met children.
Yeah.
So,
Neat. And then your first teaching job, how'd you get into teaching?
my first teaching job was in the Hart School in Hartford. It was because a friend of mine was resigning. He was leaving, and he said, would you be interested in a job? And I sort of, drive to Hartford didn't appeal to me too much, but I was always been interested. I took it, let's put it. And I can't remember the years that I did it. I did it for a while. I left when Gunther Schuller went to Boston. Mm-hmm. After he'd been there, he asked me to come to teach in Boston. Mm-hmm. He wanted somebody of a different persuasion. They had already two people from the BSO, but he was into new music, and I had been doing new music with him a lot. Mm-hmm. And so I went on to Boston. In the meantime, the Yale School of Music had affiliation with Bob Nagel and the New York Brass Quintet, and
okay.
Somewhere in there, I started teaching at Yale. I think I started with one student, and he used to come to New York for his lesson.
When was that?
Oh, God.
60s, 50s? I mean,
late 50s, right
Okay.
around 60.
All right.
And that class grew, and I ended up staying there from, if that was 1960, I left about 40 years later.
God.
So
Yeah.
I left in just the turn of the century is when I finally resigned from Yale. And New England, I stayed on for, more than 20 years, and at the time Wendy died, I left, and then after a couple of years they asked me to come back. I went back for a while, but then again resigned the second time. So meantime, Manhattan School had asked me to come in for a time, so there was a time there where I was teaching in New England and Manhattan and Yale.
And Harvard.
And then Rutgers.
Rutgers too.
Well, because I would, when I came back to New York, I had decided, because of the Chicago experience that we haven't talked about,
We'll go there.
that and with a lot of advice from, I had some really good friends, because after I came back to New York from Chicago in '59, I did far better than I had ever done before I went there. And it was a result, it was because a few people. Harvey Phillips, for one, was very helpful. Conductor at the New York City Ballet, Robert Irving, had been conductor of the Royal Ballet when I was playing with them. So it was a few people like that that got me going in New York through that period. I'm wandering some, and I've forgotten the original question.
So have I. That's okay. Teaching. But how did you manage all of that commuting? I mean, you must have had a family by then.
I think
I'm
going to answer by an anecdote, because
Okay.
I remember a trumpet player I was playing in the New York City Opera and the ballet and the Brass Quintet, and I took on something else, and he said, "Do you think you're going to get away with it?" And I said, "Well, I'll stop when they tell me to stop." I didn't ask for these. So the how is a mixture of things. It's not as gargantuan as it sounds. First of all, New York City Ballet was a 6-month job. It was not 52 weeks. The academic calendar is obvious to us all, and so these things tended to intertwine. And I called it plate spinning. Did you ever see a
Yes,
plate spinning?
absolutely.
That was when people talk about freelancing, I call it, it's really plate spinning. And God, I did it for a long time.
And you had full classes in each?
Well, the
Music
biggest
school?
class was New England. That grew quickly to a 2-day gig, and they turned it into a full-time job, because if I did the number of hours in 2 days that you need to qualify as full-time.
Yeah.
Yale was a 1-day thing, then ultimately became 2. So most of these teaching, that's how they grew. They started as 1-day things. So
you were able to get back in the evenings for the ballet and
yeah.
whatever.
Yeah, I used to fly to Boston, and I drove to New Haven.
Okay. And where did you tend to live at that time? Just out of curiosity.
When I started to get busy, I would have to say we had moved to New Jersey and bought our first house.
Okay.
When that was, I don't know, 50 years ago.
Yeah, sure. Okay. And then one of the things we kind of glazed over were your first teachers, or maybe your most influential ones.
The first teacher who really had any marked effect, it was during the war. Everybody gets into chop problems, you go see the experts. So Don S. Ronald was the chop doctor of all time.
Reinhardt?
Donald Reinhardt,
Yeah.
Pivot System Reinhardt.
Yeah. Upstream,
And
downstream.
I would say he's the first serious trombone teacher I had, and that was during the war. And I went whenever I could go. But Juilliard then meant having a regular teacher, David Schumann, and I had him for 2 years, because I left Juilliard very quickly. I was only there a year.
So you didn't graduate, you just got gigs immediately.
I remember having to do a class on curriculum somewhere at somebody's request, and I said, all I got is a driver's license, and that's true. That's all I have is a driver's license. I don't have any.
Yeah.
And so it worked out pretty well, but I don't advise it. It went that way. It wasn't planned. I didn't intend it.
Yeah.
And
David Schumann, where did he come from? Or
Dave was, I think he was from Boston, and I think he'd studied some with Reichman, who was the principal trombone in Boston for those many, many years pre-World War II and actually post. But he was never really a part of the community in New York. He was an eccentric, and he was not a very popular guy. He was into solo playing way back in the 40s. And I remember his first town hall recital. He hired the hall, right, and gave a recital. There were hardly any trombonists there at all. And they just sort of turned away from it. That was really atypical at the time.
Yeah.
And he nudged me in that direction. I didn't take it seriously. I was out to make a living. I needed a job.
Yeah, sure. Interesting.
And but so after Utah, I met a percussionist who was a son of the oboe player in the NBC Symphony. Paulo Renzi was his name. I can't remember if that was his name or his father's name, but the name is Renzi. And he said, you should study with Biasi. And Biasi was a trombonist with the NBC Symphony. And so I stayed with Biasi as a private teacher. He was not affiliated with schools. He didn't particularly like to teach, and he was doing his friend a favor, quotes. But we got to know each other quite well. And probably the most important teacher of all I taught, he was tough.
Italian American?
You know, if you told him you didn't have a chance to practice wiki, he'd say, so put the money on the table and go on home. And, you know, it was that kind of discipline. And I didn't need it. I had never had that before. And I probably practiced more and worked harder during that time with Biasi than any other time. That would have been mid-20s. So.
Wow. Amazing. And what kind of books did you work out of back then? Arvin?
The Bible, the Bordoni Bible. Simone Montilla was a favorite of Biasi's. Schumann was big into Koprash. Not nearly as sophisticated a group of etudes that you see now.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody has everything. It's,
Okay.
I remember almost no emphasis on solo playing at all.
Yeah.
The schools didn't require solo playing. There were no recitals required, although I was there a relatively short time, but basically that's the case. So I existed as a professional for a long time before ever anybody asked me to play a solo, and that's unfortunate because it was very difficult to start playing. I think after I joined the New York Brass Quintet that soloing became an issue.
Interesting.
And the year I joined, which would have been about 60, one of the things they wanted, they said, we're all going to make an album. So we like to make a solo album, which was pretty uncommon at that time. It wasn't not that much, but Gabriel Masson was recording in Paris. Of course, we had those records, but nothing in the United States.
That's about all there was, right?
And so I quickly scurried because I wanted the gig. And I did an album for Golden Crest Records at that time. And
Where'd you
why
play?
did I get all that? And so this was really the first serious soloing I had done, and I was already, it was 1960, so I was, in my mid-30s.
Yeah.
I have regretted that. I wish I had started earlier. I remember every solo I learned in high school, and there's a big gap in there between high school graduation and this album that I'm talking about.
What solos did you learn in high school? I'm curious.
Oh dear, all the high school things. Morceau Symphonique, the Atlantic Zephyrs, Bluebells of Scotland, and what's that other one? Loves This or That, Enchantment or something.
Oh yeah, Thoughts of Love.
That kind of stuff.
Yeah, Love's Enchantment. Okay, now can you talk about the beginnings of the New York Brass Quintet? Wasn't it the very first brass quintet, or was it that one in Chicago?
Sort of. Well, you know, historically you're on the mark because, yes, that one in Chicago that Schilke and Herseth and Jacobs and Crisafulli and Farkas used to put together a brass quintet in the spring, and they do a short tour for Holton, and they, I think, also recorded with that group as well.
They didn't last, I guess.
No,
Yeah.
they didn't, and couldn't begin to tell you the reason. It was not at a time that I was there.
Right.
It was before that.
Was that the first anyone had ever heard of the genre?
Well, that's the first that I had.
Yeah.
When I left Chicago in 58 or 9, two reasons I left was I was offered the New York City Ballet and I was offered the New York Brass Quintet. So we packed up and went back to New York. Why did I say that?
Talking about the New York Brass Quintet.
It had been formed for a while. They had just done their first recording, which was New York Brass Quintet in concert.
And who did you replace?
What's that?
Who did you replace?
Keith Brown. Keith Brown went to the Philadelphia Orchestra from that.
Amazing.
There had been one other trombonist before him by the name of Irwin Price. Irwin's still alive, and he's one of the. Last I knew, he was still keeping an office in the local 802 in New York. But anyway.
Okay, Robert Nagel was in it at that time.
Right.
Okay, but not Alan Dean.
Bob had formed this group with as an offshoot from something called the New York. A guy by the name of Sam Barron, a flute player. They had forgot what they called it. Sort of a small wind ensemble. The offshoot of was the New York Woodwind Quintet. Barron went that way, and Nagel formed a brass quintet, and they really formed it because of the opportunity of doing young audience concerts had just begun, and this organization was formed. So that's how they got started. And so I don't know what years that was, but I joined in, as I say, 59 or 60, and I knew little about it. I did know of this quintet that had formed in Chicago. I remember even playing a concert in Chicago, one piece on a concert. Never took it very seriously. And when, how you remember the first concert with the New York Brass Quintet, we got together to rehearse, and the Boats of Sonatine was on the concert. And there was a horn player who was also new. I think he was only subbing by the name of Buffington. He was a well-known horn player in New York. And so we did this first. We said, okay, we'll see you in Boston. We were playing the Garden Museum. So Buffington and I both said, oh no, we're not going to play this piece anywhere unless we have another rehearsal. My first concert with the Brass Quintet, I do remember that, but I don't remember many since then.
And you ended up commissioning lots of work. So you basically created the literature, the basis for all the literature.
Well, the stuff that started to happen was, although we didn't commission it, Schuller wrote a brass quintet. It was a Rockefeller Foundation grant. And Boza had already written his quintet. So the Boza, and then Malcom Arnold wrote a quintet. And that was a gift. We didn't really have to. Bob went on a trip to England with a Pro Musica, and he went to see Arnold and left him a recording of that New York Brass Quintet in concert, and asked if he'd write a piece. He didn't hear from him until the piece arrived. He wrote the piece and gave it to us.
Amazing.
So that was a really important program from us, the Schuller, the Boza, and the Arnold, because they're very different pieces, and so a showpiece for a concert was, in a way, to the listener, startling, because it hadn't been done before, and to have really fine pieces like that, right, made offered as a vehicle. And I jokingly say I made more money coaching the Ettler than any other of the brass, because at Yale, a composer there by the name of Joan Panetti was a student of Ettler's. I think I coached that every summer for 10 years in Norfolk.
Yeah.
But it was a favorite piece. And the first strong awareness on my part of the mixing of idioms, of atonality and jazz, and I didn't see the jazz in Ettler for quite a long time. And a light went on one day, and I said, "Oh my God!" And he was an oboe player. You see, he was not a jazz player. But I suddenly changed my thinking about that piece entirely.
Huh.
So it's authoritative. Schuller likes the expression third stream. I think he invented it, but as a matter of fact, I think Ettler's pieces is much third stream, and not so hard on the sleeve. Schuller's mixing of idioms is right out there.
Yes.
Ettler, it's more subtle. And so, if I answer that question about favorite pieces, I think Ettler would be at the top of my list. The Arnold, I really love the Arnold. A lovely trombone solo. See, I think it's the first of the repertoire that suddenly everything stopped and the trombone played a solo, which is unique. It didn't happen in Ewald, it didn't happen in Mozart. You have little snitches of here all of a sudden. Arnold paid attention, and I used to jokingly say that, well, the reason he gave the trombone the solo in the second movement was because all the things, the technical stuff in the first and the outside, the trombone really wasn't able to keep up with the trumpet, so he gave him something he could play all by himself. Well, that's it. That's after too many days on the road.
Yeah. All right. Okay, and talk about Eine kleine Posaunenmusik.
Well, a lot of
how that
funny
came
anecdotes about that.
Yeah.
To get to something we talked about earlier, there's a piece I think I'd like to see played more. Let me start off. Do you know the Eine, Ricchinelli?
Yeah.
Well, I had been asked. Dennis didn't want to record it, or forgotten what his
Dennis Wick.
Dennis Wick. It was
Okay.
actually it was written for him, and he did the first performance in London. Anyway, he passed it along to me, and forgotten what I was going to say. Oh yes,
Yeah, it's okay.
And it's one of each instrument, sort of. And they can use two percussion, but it's got a trumpet and a horn in it. That's a little simplistic, but anyway, it was only about 12 or 13 players, which was what the contemporary chamber ensemble of Arthur Weissburg, which I was involved with for many years. That was the instrumentation, so we took it on the tour once, and because it was so, and I thought, well, this would be neat for trombonists because it had something other than piano, because the only time we played solos with piano, and if you got really lucky, you might get to play with a band or an orchestra, but mostly it was piano. This was such a neat experience. I really came to like this rather awkward, angular kind of piece. It was very challenging to make something of it stylistically, took thought, dealing with the tonality factors and the notated metric rubatos and stuff was something that was an outgrowth of all these things I'd messed around with Biche and Boutry, and all of a sudden here was a piece that I could use this stuff and use it as well to teach. So anyway, that was so successful to me. I asked Gunther if he'd do it. Well, he asked me to do him a favor. That's how the Eine kleine Posaune came about. I was walking down the hall in New England one day in Boston. He said, "John, I need you. Could you be free? I'm doing an album with Jerry Schwartz. We want you on euphonium. Could you make yourself free? It'd take about 3 days," and so on. And I said, "Well, yeah, I will if you do me a favor." And he said, "What?" I said, "I want you to write me a piece." And he said, "For nothing?" I mean, it was exactly. He said, I'd never forget it. Nothing? Geez, I don't want this on this interview. You can take that.
That's okay.
And I said, no. So we agreed on a price. And months went by. I got a call one day, and he said, "Hey, John, if you don't get a performance date for this piece, I'll probably not write it." So I got Yale to agree to a piece. And I told him that I wanted it for 13 or 14 instruments with solo, just like the Eine. And I sent him the piece and the recording of it. What came back was a piece for about 30 players, which means in order to do the piece now you have to have a wind ensemble of some nature. So you couldn't go at random and pick up a thing like that. So people don't play them, and I think that's one of the reasons. Whether there's an acceptance or rejection of his writing, I don't really know. That changes over the years, but in the meantime, I think it's a great piece. In terms of the crossover, which is such a controversial and remains never-endingly controversial. I jokingly say to my students, never say that you can't play jazz. You don't just say you play it badly and get on with it. The whole idea of you can or can't, or you are or you aren't.
Yeah.
It's like the gender issue now. It's
Yeah.
but how'd I get off on it?
Oh, that it's a jazzy
So,
piece. It's
but in
third
any
string.
case, he's it's based on a tone row, and he used this row. He says himself a number of times in other pieces. So it automatically draws on jazz, and but throughout there is this reference to this row that he's on. So this has appeared in print somewhere, but I met his father, who was a violinist who played in the Philharmonic and in Cleveland or so. Anyway, at someplace we're talking, he said, how's the trombone piece? And I said, well, yeah, it's so high. And he said, yeah, I spoke to Gunther about it, and in a subsequent conversation, I mentioned that he'd written an F sharp in the cadenza, in the second movement. And so he said, well, you sent me, the tapes you sent me had Fs on it. If you can play an F, you can play an F sharp. So,
Okay.
yeah, right. That's a rug. So, I was already, speaking of age, in mid-60s, and asking Gunther Schuller to write a piece for you when you're mid-60s is sort of takes a lot of, but anyway.
That's fantastic.
I really loved working on it, and it made me work, and at a time in my life where I probably wouldn't have. But the fact that it's not played, I wonder about a lot. But I do think this instrumentation thing is a factor.
Sure.
And he doesn't write with the idea of piano transcriptions. He always says it can't be done, and of course, in a sense, it can't.
Yeah, sure.
So, but it is published with piano transcription. But I should imagine that young players coming up on it as a piece that's not that satisfying. I don't know really.
Okay.
Whatever.
Yeah.
There it is. And
Yeah, I heard it in 1983 at an ITF in Nashville.
I did it in Nashville.
Yeah, it was wonderful.
Well, I remember saying to Gunther, I said, geez, I'm sorry, Gunther, that's something. He said, I don't know how you could possibly play at all in this situation, much less play this piece. So
Okay.
Strangely enough, I played there another time a couple of years later, and I played Annie Laurie and Herbert L. Clark's whole, and played so badly after the Schuller. I should stay with the Schuller from now.
Well, you played something like, what was the name of that? It was maybe for 3 trombones. Right after that, I think, with 2 other players.
I did a thing with the trombone choir from Manhattan.
No, that 1983 I'm talking, and at the workshop after Eine, kleine Posaunenmusik, I think you played.
There was a trombone. Was it a Gunther Schuller?
Mazaza or something. I forget the name of it.
Well, Schuller had written a trombone quartet with piano, or trio with piano.
No, this was like one of those Herbert L. Clark type things, I think. But anyway.
It's vague, I think.
Yeah, but it was very much fun. I remember that.
Right.
Okay, and then tackling the Berio Sequenza V.
Well,
Just curious, how old
Okay.
were you when you tackled that piece? This is interesting.
we were in New Jersey, so the boys would have been still in high school.
And you were teaching at New College.
I'd say 40 years ago, 30, that would be 70.
70.
Yeah, I was going,
About
Well,
74, maybe?
I have to do it by houses. We were living in New Jersey, and so that was right after having lived in Long Island post-Chicago, which would have been through the 60s, and so it was right in the 70s somewhere. What happened with that, I had, on one of my trips to Hartford, a friend of mine who was teaching said, you got to hear this record, and he played Dubinko's recording of that thing, and I said, oh my God. And I thought of it. It's not long after that, Bob Nagel said, John, we're going to play in Atlanta at that Composers Festival, and I'd love you to have you do this piece, the Berio. I said, I can't play that. I'm not going to. He said, John, like it's X dollars. I don't know how much, he said, but you know, we're going down there and the whole gig pays a few $1,000s. He said, you know, what's the big deal? He said, so well, all right, I'll get it. And I got the piece, and I got the record. And I started working on it, and Wendy came down. I was working in the basement, and she came down and says, what is that? And I said, well, it's this piece I'm going to play in Atlanta. And she said, you're not playing that piece in public. She was very English, if you remember. So she said, it's very English. You're not playing that piece in public. Well, as it turns out, I did, and it was a revelation to me, because I went out and I did not play it well. I mean, I had worked out this and worked out that, and I got more of a reaction to the Berio than any solo I'd ever done. And I said, hey, you know, maybe there's something to this track. So I kept working, and I said, you know, I told her it went very well. And she said, so I said, I'm going to play it for the kids in Yale this summer. So she said, okay. She came around, so she came to here, and she said, look, you got to change that entrance. It's ridiculous the way you do it. You got to do this and you got to do that. So she started working on it with me from a theater. She was a dancer and a choreographer. And well, I said, okay, I took it rather seriously. And she went to the library. She got all the books she could get on the clown.
Grok?
Grok.
Uh-huh.
And so that became part of the process. The reason it was so important to me is that I had never really seriously thought much about the demeanor as decisive in performance. That it could make or break a performance. You could play a piece very badly and perform it extremely well, or you could perform it badly and play it really well, and it would, you know, this was one thing, and it goes together, and to one. So I learned that from the Berio. I do remember having difficulty when I went from the big ensemble orchestra playing to the brass quintet. I remember getting accustomed to walking out on stage with only 5 people and feeling, that took a while. It wasn't easy. Yeah. And but the Berio, God, it changed my view of so much, and especially in teaching. And I mentioned, like I made a comment to you last night. I told this one, don't ever give up an audition because you'll never get a job anywhere else. And it was demeanor that I was talking about. And this had a way of behaving in a way that it was a turnoff. That's very common to most of us. We've all seen it. We've experienced. We maybe had the same difficulty ourselves. I certainly have. Mm-hmm.
Now Wendy also she showed you some ballet positions. For the Berio. So
I used to know the numbers of them, but
this position, something like that, and
and a very sort of flamboyant kind of posturing for that opening. You don't think I can play this goddamn thing? That's an old expression from an Italian trombonist. That's another story. Too long to make it. But,
all right.
So
and then so you started.
So not only did it change the way I felt about my own playing and performance, but also in teaching, I began to realize that how very important it was how people presented themselves. Could make such a, and that in itself injects itself into the music as well. So
yeah, sure. And did you soon after teach the Berio? Did you start teaching it immediately, or? How did that go?
Basically, I didn't push it, especially if people were interested. I really did get into it, But I didn't have everybody do it. I didn't think that anybody should be playing unless they had some real curiosity about it.
Right. Gosh.
So I think of the Berio in a much more personal way than I do a tutorial. I didn't teach in that vein very much. Probably you do, but it was the first, and probably I went from there to the Druckmann. Do you know the Druckmann?
Yeah, Animus 1.
Animus 1.
Yeah.
And I got into that.
Uh-huh.
It was funnier, the Druckmann. It was a little lighter, and you could do more staging and free. I felt the Berio to be a much more disciplined thing. You were locked into a box. If you were going to get anything across, it would have to be really well thought out and concentrated, or it wouldn't work.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah. Okay. Just Arthur Weissburg.
Well, Arthur Weissburg was, let's start with Gunther because Gunther was first. He started a group in New York called 20th Century Innovations.
Okay.
And asked me to join. And I suddenly realized how little I knew about it, and how confined my instrumental expectation was. I was a tenor trombone player. I always try to play first. If I didn't, that didn't mean I wanted to. I didn't really think too seriously about low register, and all of a sudden this issue of registration became a factor. The metric thing was an issue. I remember doing the Berio double concerto, one of the early ones, and I did the first rehearsal, and I remember going, how I sang, I can't play this piece. So I had a week, and so then I started thinking a lot about study material and started looking. And I realized that none of the materials that I had studied as a student really prepared you for this stuff.
Right.
So the first one I ran onto was Biasi, because that really gets into complex meter in many different ways.
Yeah.
It has written rubato in it, and it has metric modulation, and all the polyrhythmical kind of stuff. And I never had any study material. So I started, I remember the first student who wanted to do, he asked to do it, came and he played the 6/8-1, I think it's the third one, and I realized I couldn't tell whether he was right or wrong. It was very embarrassing. He was ahead of me. So from there I gravitated to Boutry, Etudes in Perfection, which I also really feel are excellent for contemporary music. But this getting involved with Gunther at that time with that group sort of occasioned a lot of the study material. And then Arthur came along later, and he got a Rockefeller grant where he could form he had 13 players, 13 or 14. I always think 13 is an unlucky number, but it was 13 or 14 of us. And we were a resident at Rutgers and got a regular stipend for it. And did a bunch of stuff. I can't remember.
A lot of new pieces written for the ensemble.
Yeah, and stuff that I had never. What struck me about it was that I had in no way ever been prepared as a student.
Yeah.
For any of this,
Yeah.
and that students generally aren't,
Yeah.
or weren't. I think
Yeah.
perhaps that's not the case now. But that's what sort of interested in that kind of complexity has, I think, lessened in recent years.
Yeah.
I don't know if Boulez is still cooking over there in Paris, but there's not much happening in New York as far as I can see. So there was a heyday for this, and so I had my 3 Bs were Biche, Boutry, and Bozza. the characteristic studies.
And so you played things like the Milhaud, the Création du Monde, and
the reason I did the Milhaud was an odd thing. I never was attracted to it, especially, but students would come to put it on their recital.
Concertino d'hiver.
Yeah, Concertino d'hiver.
Okay.
Is that what you said? Did you mention?
Well, I was talking about Arthur Weissburg. I mean, one of the things I remembered.
Yeah, Creation of the World.
No one had really heard that.
I just what?
Back then, no one had really heard that, as I recall.
Well, I did it. Well, both Gunther and Arthur were doing it. Funniest thing about that, we did a recording of it with Arthur, and I forgot what's on the other side. Was it one of these, an LP? But the engineer forgot we were recording in a church, and he forgot all his mics, and we ended up recording Creation of the World with a minimum of microphones. And then on the other side, we got an Emmy or something for the other side. I can't remember what was on the other side. Doesn't matter. So what was your? Well, as far as
yeah, there was you were very much a champion of Concertino d'hiver, as I recall.
Well, it came that way. Schumann got that written, and I having gotten to know Schumann, I have a feeling that he beat me over there because they used to be at Aspen together. And he probably wouldn't let him up until he'd written a piece. So he did write this piece with strings for trombone solo, and it didn't work for me. I just couldn't. But occasionally, you know, somebody come in and play it. One day I was standing there looking at it, and I looked at the first movement, and I suddenly hit me, my God, it's two beat. Boom, beep, bum, beep, boom, deep, boom, ba, bitch, ba, ba. And I thought, well, why in the hell? And then I started looking at it all the way through. Then there's this slow movement, which is also very bluesy. And then, of course, the other end, which jumps tonality. So I started, and I suddenly realized, yeah, this really is, quotes, a third string piece. And I started looking at it entirely differently. And then I also became aware of the fact the strings don't swing. Okay, don't let the string players read it. But basically, it's hard to get a group of players who could make that. You can get a bunch of wind players to come in and say that you want it to cook like that.
Yeah.
So when Gunther did the Eine, kleine Posaunenmusik, I wanted to have the Berio on, and I wanted to have his piece, of course, and the Eine. And the other piece, I said, well, I really think the Milhaud is much abused and not played enough, and I think it's an idiomatic issue. And so he, quotes, went out and hired a hot string set, you know, he got a, but again,
were they hot enough?
No, everything went wrong that day because they were supposed to change all the panels in the room. It was in RCA down on 44th Street. And it was just a bad day. The answer is, well, what I'd hoped for didn't happen.
Sure. Yeah, that's recording.
But I do think that's one of the things about the piece I think it's so difficult is that it really is hard to make it work. I asked Gunther time, I said, could you transcribe this for winds? You know, and he said, yeah. He says, that's a terrific idea. He says, why don't you call Madame Milhaud and ask her if she would allow me to do that? And instead of saying, I'll call her, I didn't know her from beans. Well, I never really moved on it because I don't think it's necessarily that meaningful a project, but I think it would have been interesting if that piece had been done with winds.
So did you end up liking the piece?
The Milhaud?
Yeah. It wasn't really a matter of liking, is it?
No, it's more academic with me. I just felt it was sort of a more misunderstood ugly child.
Well, what would you say your favorite piece is, trombone piece? One of them. Or one of, just in general.
Of pieces that I've recorded myself.
Sure.
I truly came to like that Eine piece.
Yeah. Okay.
Because of the whole setting. And the Crescent is a favorite, but I never really had a chance to play it with an orchestra.
Sure.
That's one of the things wrong with trombone pieces with orchestras. Nobody gets a chance to play them. So,
okay. Let me just...
I don't, right off the top of my head, I'm just, somehow or another, that question throws me.
Sure,
a lot of pieces. Couldn't duck that question.
That's all right. In your teaching philosophy, you've been an incredibly influential teacher. You have thousands of students all over the world, generations of students.
I'm not much one for set routines and set materials. I really try to establish a rapport as early as I can, because I think everything that's going to happen tutorially is going to be a reflection of the rapport that you have with that particular person. So, and I also try to impose things that I think that are important, and we've talked about some of them, both soloistically and etude, but I don't really like to hang with music that doesn't interest me. So I won't do Bordoni Book 1 and 2 because it doesn't. I've had it. I'll go to 3, and I'll put some there. There are some there that are very difficult and very hard for all of us to do, and so I gravitate there. But more importantly, philosophically, when I was in my 20s, I got involved with an analyst in New York,
Mm-hmm.
and became more and more aware of interaction. And he was into an environmentalist approach, which has to do with interaction.
Mm-hmm.
And so instinctively, and I think now with a lot of textbook preface, instinctively I gravitated in that direction. And so I try to find common ground emotionally, especially, in working with people. And I call the music a pony, like a pony, the express rider, the pony express rider. You went from one station to the next. You didn't get to choose your pony. You just got on and went as fast as you. So I don't think you should always, we should specifically lay down which horse you're going to ride, but to find the one that suits you best, and also develop the flexibility to move from one idiom or one composition or one style of playing.
So flexibility and stylistic richness, I suppose, palette, having a large, huge palette of possibilities.
I don't feel I'm answering this question as well as I like, but
That's
I haven't
okay.
thought it through. But I had something I was going to say. I forgot it.
It's all right. Your teaching, though, I mean, at least my experience of it was you were just vastly different from every other teacher that I had ever come across. And
Yeah, I did. I think people think that was in some way intended, and it was. Oh, I know what I was going to say. In this building of a rapport, and the worst thing that can happen in a relationship is that one of you is disinterested. And if the music is uninteresting to either one of you,
right.
you got a problem.
Yes.
But more importantly, if the teacher's disinterested, you got a problem. And so I always gravitated to work with things that I could work over and over again from student to student day without losing interest. That meant the kind of things that we're talking about.
So the biche and the boutry and the...
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I could stay interested in those things. And I remember saying to students, they come in, they start, and I say, we're going to be through this book by the end of the semester, surely, maybe a little bit sooner. I said, but when you're all done, you're going to look back and say, is that all there is? And I'm going to have to tell you, well, there isn't much more like this. And
yeah.
the...
And so what about orchestral excerpts? You, of course, had to teach a lot of those.
Well, I have an anecdote I like to tell. I remember when I was in Juilliard in the late 40s, a friend of mine who was new to this thing came around and says, I got to play an audition for something. So she said, what should I play? And I took out a postcard, a 2-cent postcard. And on the postcard, I wrote a list of excerpts. About 5-10 years ago, somewhere after many years, 50, 60 years went by, I was visiting him, and he said, I have something I found I want to give to you. And he brought out this postcard and handed it to me. And of course, it starts with Hongrois, right?
Hungarian march?
The Coaching March right at the top. The Coaching March, the Ballerine, Heidenleben, the Zarathustra, the Mozart Requiem. There's the
Top
top
10.
10s.
There it is on a 2-cent postcard. Huh?
Here it's on a 2-cent postcard. It's 50 years old, and they haven't changed the list. I did a talk at the ETW about 3 years ago about this whole use of excerpts as the barometer or of excellence. Trombone playing. I mean, it's gotten ridiculous. We have people who are 2 or 3 generations deep who got their job that way, and so they think it's a good thing. I mean, I got my job that way, and I got a Merc sitting in the driveway. So it has become a way of thinking that's ridiculous. I got a pretty good reception with that talk. It kind of mixed, because I really walked into this bunch of players and said, we got to stop this nonsense. And I think I used this postcard as part of my entree into the talk.
It says a lot, doesn't it?
Well, Biasi said, this goes way back to the late 40s. I complained because he didn't coach excerpts. And he said, well, what do you want to play? You want to play the violin? Can you play the violin? I said, I played the violin. He said, okay, good, now let's get on with the lesson.
Yeah.
There was a stark difference from anything we
Yeah.
had before.
So it was more like if you can
And
play.
he said, if you can play the trombone, you can play these excerpts.
Yeah.
The reverse is not true.
Right. Yeah.
And so, in effect, if you try to teach somebody to become a virtuoso using orchestral material, you're batting with a sticky wicket. It's not going to happen. So, and we have a work situation, a job opportunity situation, whereby there's very little work for that. And our schools, I said to Gunther when he was president of England, I said, you really need a statistic. How many schools are graduating people on applied orchestral instruments? How many are we graduating every year in the United States? And how many jobs are we filling? And so he wanted me to do an orchestral rep class in New England. I said, well, you got Willie Gibson writes, let Willie done it. He sits in the orchestra all day long. He said, but how many of my students are going to get jobs in orchestra? And well, that has not changed. Still the case.
But a lot of your students actually did. So.
Yeah, but they didn't get there because they played excerpts all day. I used to kid Julie about it. I always would try to get her off because she was into it.
Julie Josephson.
She was heavy into it. But
Yes.
a lot of people were. I say I walked up the street every morning at 8 o'clock to the Valkyrie every Monday morning. Whatever. I don't want to beat that drum too hard, but I do think we need a different emphasis. And I think we're perhaps getting there more and more. Most orchestras will now require some sort of solo playing.
I remember you also being really sort of advocating the alto trombone when no one else was.
But it's actual fact. I did not do. I did it a little and then I stopped. My alto.
Well, it worked. It
Well,
sort of started
I
a
have
revolution.
A funny story, if you want a funny story.
Sure.
When I joined the New York City Opera Orchestra, Stokowski was doing Orfeo. He wanted an alto trombone, and I just, it was the first time I'd ever actually played alto trombone, and so we were doing the rehearsals. And one day we were rehearsing something else, and the contractor comes. She said, "Hey, John, Stokey wants to see you." Like, well, where is he? He's up in the 6th floor. So I had to go from the pit all the way up to the 6th floor. And I walk in, and he said, "Tell me, where do you play high? What position do you play high B on the alto trombone?" And you can imagine me. But fortunately, I came up with the right answer. I said sharp third, and he said, "Play it sharper." That was the whole reason for my going up 6 foot.
Well, you went up in many ways, huh?
I didn't go that way. When I discovered that you could play it as a transposing instrument, that sort of opened up a lot. Suddenly, all of a sudden, I could move on a thing, and before had been that got in the way of the transposing thing. But if you play it as a transposing instrument, the technique quickly moves over. So.
Sure, yeah. And then pet peeves about trombone playing in the music profession.
Oh, my pet peeve of all time?
Yeah, sure.
Is what I still consider to be a highly unsophisticated use of positions. The alternate positions are treated as, second-class citizens, and so that's my pet peeve. Unfortunately, I've written a little about it. My teaching of them initially is essentially assignment says you use sharp 5th position here because I said so, but I found in teaching that I had to have much more going for it that, and so the tonality, key relationship, leading tones, that sort of thing became a basis for judgment as to what you did. And I found a wonderful article about Casals written by Leonard Rose at some point, in which Casals apparently developed this technique on cello, it came rather late in the history of the cello, but basically you never changed the strings on a resolution. All the half steps are on the same string, and
Sure.
the larger intervals moved through. And so this, if you want to think about it, has a lot of application.
The Chicago experience
Sure.
altogether.
But you could say, well, that everybody has negative experience, and do you learn from it? And what did it do for me to have that? It did a great deal. I mean, it'd be silly to say that it had no effect on me. It affected me both negatively and positively. The negative effects are still there.
And those years were from 50?
It's the writing is 57, 8, 9.
Okay.
2 seasons.
Yeah. With Reiner.
Right.
And you were first trombone?
No, they had an audition
Assistant?
for principal after Reiner moved Crisafulli down. And Bob Lambert from the Philly Orchestra and I came in first and second. And so he hired Lambert, and then he had me come on another season. He waited a year.
Okay.
And I used to be annoyed when people would ask me, or still ask me, about Chicago. What happened in Chicago? And I remember recently saying to a young, I said, how old were you in 1958? And he said, well, I wasn't born until like 70. And I said, well, why in the hell would this interest you so much? Why are you so interested in that? And it's so, I had a negative, then I said, well, you know, if people are still talking about what happened to me in Chicago, what is it, 40, 50 years later? There must have been some positive aspects to it. It can't all be negative.
Yes. So anyway, you were hired by Reiner.
As I said, there was an audition for principal, and I came in second, and was given the assistant position a year or 2 later.
Right.
And I stayed 2 years.
And you stayed 2 years.
And,
right. And
it took, I mean, I have to say this to be in all fairness, I was no more prepared for Reiner than
Reiner was prepared for you.
I was a total. Well, first of all, I'd been in psychoanalysis, and when you're in psychoanalysis, you become very self-righteous, very judgmental. And so I look at a Reiner, and I said, "This guy's a psychopath," you know. And so that's very hard to contain when you're 25 years old. You know, it kind of rubs off. And so the minute I had never had anybody turn on me the way he did, and the fact that it would be so totally disarming was a tremendous shock.
To have no tools.
All of a sudden, he's taking it from you, and he's got about 98 friends. And because you become invisible in a situation like that. When somebody turns on you like a Reiner, nobody wants to be on your side.
You're a pariah.
Huh?
You're a pariah.
You're invisible.
Yeah.
And so I had a couple of those experiences, and I had one really, really good experience with it, because in the end I had to record some Wagner excerpts in which there was a lot of bass trumpet. And I had watched him, and after we recorded this solo, he looked at me and he said, "Could you play it softer, please?" And I remembered how many times I'd seen him do this to people. "Could you play it softer, please?" "Yes, Dr. Wright." So we must have done it 12 times, and I never played it softer. It just kept playing it over and over again, and he just finally threw his baton on the floor and walked off, and that was my last performance with. And I sort of felt in a way, okay, you son of a bitch, you know, you've had me, and so now to a very small degree I've had you. And he did that so much to people. And you know what kills me is I get a letter, every 3 months, I get a letter from the Chicago Alumni Association, Chicago Symphony Alumni Association, asking me for $30. I keep saying, and I got one home on the desk, and I said to him, what am I going to do? I got to send him a letter until I ask him, please stop sending this. Anyway, but again, I think it's a character builder, and changed my life.
What doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
In a sense. I'm grateful for that. But these 80s are too much a time of reflection. As you get more and more inactive and more into, reflection becomes much more a part of your life than it was before. So I could do without that. Whenever I have a good lesson, and occasionally, I have a really terrific high school student now, and he's going into, he got into Eastman, he's going to San Francisco. So, I say to Mary, you know, when he comes, it's like a vacation. You get away from all these retrospective reflections.
Yeah, you're in the now. Okay, let's look at this. Say your ideal trombone sound.
Well, I could give you a corny, obvious answer, but Dorsey. I never heard, the only person I've ever heard whose sound that struck me is in that class is Irby. Irby had a gorgeous sound. So I don't think of, so when you come around to, you just say, well, what about the classical trombone players? I could say the obvious, and certainly meaning it to Pulis probably, but I mean there's so little to Pulis to hear. I've heard people say that they pattern their playing and that sound after Pulis, and there's no recordings of Pulis that you could use for that.
Sure.
They're chosen. But again, I'm a wannabe, I think, in terms of trombone, and so Bill Harris, Watros, and you know all of them.
So when you say wannabe, you mean a jazz wannabe?
I would have liked that, but I really wasn't good at it. Remember, I said, say you can play jazz, but don't. It was, and I didn't really. There wasn't the kind of instruction available, education in terms of jazz at that time.
Yeah.
It was very much through those World War II years and the years you could either do it or you couldn't.
Yeah.
It was not something that was taught.
Right.
And in the end, I really now looking at quotes, talent, gifts, whatever. I did much better at what I did than I would have done had I done that. I just did not have the freedom to do it.
And how do you get students to play more musically, more expressively, more artistically?
By trying to get them to look a little more into their own selves and their own feelings about many things. I like to use theater, fantasy, in order to get them to get beyond the how-tos of it. I would have to say, I don't have any tonguing techniques or any embouchure drills or anything else that's going to help them do what you're talking about. It has to be a head thing.
Sure.
And it gets to if they haven't really found that part of themselves, to try to help them get there.
Sure.
Most students, that's probably not a fair statement, but we learn so much by knowing what's wrong with what we're doing. And then my own teaching has the same. I think that one of the best things I could say about Dave Schumann was that he didn't do that. But most teachers I ever had were basically concentrated on correcting everything, as opposed. And I let lots of things go by.
Yeah.
If I'm hearing something that could grow.
Yeah, sure.
But I would really have to say, rather than having any plan in mind, I do it instinctively if I do it. I don't know really how I do it.
Good.
Except that it's that old question of rapport.
And what would you say to young students now, or young trombone players? Just a few words of wisdom from all your experience and knowledge.
Well, it's a sort of a generalization. I think whether they're going, if they were if you're talking in terms of success as a professional, it's not going to have a hell of a lot to do with how you play. Or it's not going to have just to do with how you play. It's going to have to do with interpersonal skills, interactive skills, learning how to network, and that's very hard to. And people will tend to shy away from it. There's still that high school mentality out there that said if you practice hard and get good, everything's going to be fine. I had something I used to tell students if when they said to me, should I become a professional player, am I good enough? And I'd say no, always. They say, why do you say no? I said, because you asked me the question. So what I'm saying is that I think those who should become a professional, who can't do anything else, so they must do it. And those are the people that are going to make the kind of effort that will bring it about. The kind of effort in every way, not just instrumentally.
Sure.
I think right now, I've been very much preoccupied with this audition process which I think has been totally corrupted. It's a mess. They just had an audition in D.C. about a month ago, 90-some players. Nobody was chosen. They found out afterward, because I know the Californians, they had all the Californians in one group. And, when things like that, what the hell's going on? So they actually had no intention.
Was it behind a screen?
Huh?
Was it behind a screen?
I think they started behind the screen, and I don't know if it ever got out. Usually they do come from behind the screen.
Yeah.
But I hear such gross things about these auditions. And Ixom's corrupted it. The American Federation has taken a walk. When I gave a talk on excerpts that in D.C. that I mentioned earlier on, but I prefaced it by saying that I had considered talking about the alternate positions, but having heard that there's a Chinese trombone being developed that has no alternate positions, I decided to drop it. And it's to be called the missionary model. And of course, got away with it, but what you said, a pet peeve, so that sort of is indicative of the fact that you do lose patience after a while. I have students, and I will write in what I'd like them to do, and even say, hey, look, I'm not saying you got to do this when I'm not here. But when you come into my studio and sit down, and I ask you to do a particular set of positions, and you ignore that I ever put them there, that's a bit annoying. Predictability of articulation is disturbing to me. For instance, as an example, I was once driving on one of my many trips in Boston late at night, and I'm picking up the Mozart Requiem, and I said, oh, good, I'm going to enlist for the trombone solo. And here we are, it's coming live from Europe somewhere, and I get to the trombone solo, and I could tell every position that this trombone player used by the idiosyncrasy of the articulation. And I thought, it became a kind of a joke with me. But I had, subsequent to that, somewhere along, one of my students went to audition at your alma mater. And he played the Mozart Requiem. And one of the trombonists said, that's a rather unusual set of positions you're using. And someone else said, those are Swallow's positions. So I said, who was it? He said, I don't know who they were. I didn't recognize them, so I never found who said that. I said, well, I've got a lot of money coming, because if they're mine, I should be getting rights. Anyway, they're not mine. I learned from my old professor, Biasi, to use them, and he was very skilled, and he was a Simon Says-er. You had to learn it by just doing what he over and over again. But the character, this predictability of articulation is what's concerning me. It's possible to start in the middle of the trombone and imitate articulation if you use starting middle B flat and resolve to E flat, and then you can go out to B and you resolve to E in fifth, and then you keep going. You can keep doing that all the way up the slide. So your resolution in your 5-1, and every key can be a duplication of the other. So it doesn't have to change just because you change keys. you keep your half steps resolutory on the same air chamber, and as much as possible to keep natural slurs on anything over a half step. And that becomes impossible at times, and so I revert to a Galamian quote that I heard years ago, and as you can always gliss once in one direction, but never twice. So I sometimes regret that I haven't done more writing on the topic. I did do one article on it, and I look at it now, and it's, looking back 20 years, it wasn't as well done as it might be, but I tried to start again, and at 85, I quickly lose enthusiasm after a while. It's easier to keep that enthusiasm if you're seeing the 3 or 4 students a day. Then you can, I very much was into it. But that's one of my pet peeves. Another one, you want another one? It's the bigger is better. Drives me crazy. I'm old enough to have lived through the time when trombonists, orchestral trombonists moved from the 527 trombone, and of course in Europe even smaller. They gradually in 50 years got over to the point where it's absolutely exclusive, and even being further perfected every year. But the fact that the gravitation to the bigness of the trumpets got smaller doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense in certain repertoire. I remember a kid playing in a master class I did in Boston, and he was struggling with the last movement of the Brahms second. And after having worked our way through it, I said, well, look, there's no reason if you were to have to perform this piece that you need to use an instrument and a mouthpiece of that size. I mean, certainly Brahms would never have expected it. And he said, don't you think he would have liked it better? Of course, the only one in the room that laughed was me, but I thought that was hysterical. And so, apropos, it seems it grows and grows and grows. And I had a student recently buy a new black mouthpiece, which is bigger than any I've ever seen before, and the throat is a mile long, it just seems that the most important thing would be that you can play this locked-in repertoire. As long as you can play that repertoire, then the equipment can be as big as you can let it go, as long as you can still do it. And of course, if you still can't make the last half step, you've got a few years ahead of you. You may make it down the line, as though that and the bigness in itself has merit. It really doesn't make a lot of sense, and it's such a sense of monkey see, monkey do. You hardly dare appear with the wrong instrument in terms of bore size. You play, so 527 is dead.
Yeah,
it's over the hill.
Yeah.
And whether it had or hasn't merit is not an issue. There's a general. It's seeming so, but do you think so? I mean, is there a seeming sense that that's it? That's it.
In certain circles, and this certain
orchestrally speaking.
Yeah, and each certain circle, of course, thinks they're the center of the universe.
What's that?
Each of these circles, each of these Valhallas thinks basically they're the center of the universe,
Okay.
and that they have the answer. So
Yeah.
it's kind of like that. But yeah, I agree. It's really always funny when I tell people. Gosh, well, what did they play in you played in a German orchestra? What did your section play? Expecting everybody to play the same German instrument or something. Well, nobody. There was a Bach, there was a Kahn, there was a Getzen, there was a Miraphone, there was, all whatever people felt like playing.
I remember going to Germany and playing in one of the big cities, and the people from the opera, I can't even remember the city, people from the opera came. And the trombonist, very nice, we went and drank beer, and he said to me, Tom, I'm very curious why you play such a big trombone. And I was playing at Bach 42. And I said, well, actually, as young players, they told us that people in Germany played with big trombones like this. I said, I don't know if it's true or not, but he sort of laughed.
Yeah, it is funny. Yeah. And right now in Bayreuth, they're playing Kahns. The most German
the modern
place on
contemporary
in the planet. Yeah. So In Vienna,
This,
mixed as well.
so there's a pet peeve. The question of instrumentality and what it does to our thinking is disturbing. I think I jokingly say should be shipwrecked on a desert island and have whatever floated ashore, and you'd have to play it.
Yeah.
As opposed to looking for the panacea.
Okay. Well, you have any closing words? Anything that you just really like to say?
Thank you for asking me for these thoughts. And I feel okay about it. I think they're probably more relevant than they would be if I had a chance to think about it more. I've thought about this stuff for years, and how it comes out at one point or another. I seem to be pretty consistent, and I feel okay about that.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, thank you very, very much.
Thank you for your interest. I appreciate it. Well, I tend to gravitate to the controversial when it comes to talking about the instrument or the music you play or how you play it. But if you're not controversial, you're not much. So I recommend it.
Thank you.
Keeps you younger.